we will still have one Friday next week, before Christmas week, at which time we are going to conclude our present mini-series, and at which time we will deal with the scripture from Nag Hammadi, which is probably the most poetic of them all, and which is called the Gospel of Truth, and which was discovered by a gentleman whom it was our privilege to know, Professor Gilles Quisper of Holland, in an antiquary shop in Brussels. And since I spent a little bit of time, about a year in Belgium, and I tell you, in Brussels antique shops you can buy anything, because they are so full of stuff. And the Belgians are very good that way. In any event, there they found a volume of Nag Hammadi in the antiquary shop, so Professor Quispel, who did not intend to do so, he says, I got right away in the train and went to Switzerland to see Jung. And I said, I don't know what, Dr. Jung, we have something very valuable. This is what has been described before as some of the writings of the great Valentinus, and apparently they have been spirited out of Egypt after the discovery, and I think you should have this. So he said, well, yes, but I don't have enough Swiss francs to buy it. However, he made telephone calls and sent telegrams and so forth. Before too long, the funds came in, and Quispel was on his way to Brussels again. He got the book and brought it back. And fairly soon thereafter was the 80th birthday of Carl Jung. And the book was presented to him on his birthday, and ever after, the book was called the Codex Jung. And I will never forgive the Jung Institute, and so, because I think it was after Carl Jung's passing already, but they gave the bloody volume back to the Egyptians. Now, you know, I wouldn't have done that if 15 Egyptian rifles had been pointed at me. But I did, the collection should be together. Well, it's together, but it is neglected. When you ask the Egyptian authorities where is the Nag Hammadi collection, they can't even tell you where it is. It's in the Coptic Museum, which is an old neglected museum. So unfortunately that happened, but in any event it is the Codex Jung, which contains a few other treatises, and in addition to that the Gospel of Truth, which has been mentioned by some of the church fathers way early in Latin under the name of Evangelium Veritatis, the Gospel of Truth. So it's because of the connections with Jung and with Valentinus, it is really something that should be close to our heart, and the principal scripture in it is the Gospel of Truth, which we will deal with next Friday if all goes well, unless of course we are you are all captured in the various stores shopping, where they won't let you out until you buy this and buy that, you know, the hold-up shopping. In any event, hopefully that is not what will occur, but tonight we still have a very interesting other scripture from Nag Hammadi, which I think will please you, and of which I made a sort of a brief recension with all the quotations which I consider to be the most important. I even have the numbers of the sayings there, and I think it will be of interest to you. Actually, this event which I just mentioned about the discovery of the Jung Codes occurred in 1955 in Brussels. Most of the copies found at Naj Hammadi date for around 350 to 400 AD, but it is obvious that they are copies of originals that are much older, and according to the noted German scholar Helmut Köster, who worked at Harvard, he felt assured that almost everything, if not everything, in the Naj Hammadi collection was of earlier provenance. Now, I don't want to use up too much time with these general introductory matters, but just to give you an idea concerning the diversity of the library, they justly named it a library because it consists of several books. Moreover, which is also interesting, the Naj Hammadi codices are the first example thus far in archaeology of the codex, and the codex is the earliest form of a book. What happens with the codex, people write on pages, then they bind them together by various means, usually have a leather tongue going through them, and then they have a hard leather cover on both sides, and that makes up a codex. They are handwritten, but they are bound. It's the first, and they are, the Naj Hammadi codices are written on papyrus, which was, of course, the prized literary product of Egypt. Rather different from, let us say, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are written on parchment. Parchment, in turn, is made out of animal skins, for which reason it spoils much more easily, and let's say it's less safe from depredations than papyrus. Now, I said enough about that. So let me just very quickly indicate to you the categories of writings which are in these codices. The first one is the group which contains, let me see, where are we here? Oh yeah, contains alternative accounts of the creation myth. And if you ever come across it, it's really very fascinating material. We did a series on it years ago, and that is the Apocryphon of John, which has two versions, and in the same group we find the hypostasis of the archons, the Gospel of the Egyptians, which we will mention next time, on the origin of the world, the paraphrase of Shem, the Apocalypse of Adam. These all relate to the creation story in Gnostic version. The second group is what we were just talking about, the Jung Codex, which contains two main treatises, namely the Gospel of Truth, which I just mentioned, and the treatise of the resurrection, and also a few other smaller materials. The third group, let's see, the third group contains materials largely about spiritual themes, such as the nature of reality, the nature of the soul, spiritual salvation, and the relationship of the soul to the world. And let's say of the world. And in addition to that, we have another codex which contains the also famous and really very interesting treatise of the 8th and the 9th, which is a Hermetic initiation discourse, the prayer of thanksgiving, the 3 steles of Seth, and the prayer of St. Paul. And then the very next after that deals mainly with the relationship of the soul to the world. And there we have Thunder, the Perfect Mind, a famous and awesome treatise of the feminine principle, the Thought of Norea, which is again a feminine scripture, the Sophia of Jesus Christ in the exegesis of the soul. That entire volume deals with feminine scriptures. Then the 5th is the Apocalypse of Peter. This deals with writings of the apostles, also bound together in one volume. The Apocalypse of Peter, the letter of Peter to Philip, the Acts of Peter and the 12 apostles, the 1st and 2nd Apocalypse of James, and the Apocalypse of Paul, which is also very interesting. And then we come, last but not least, to the volume that we are dealing with tonight, namely that contains the Book of Thomas the Contender, the Dialogue of the Savior, the Apocryphon of James, the Gospel of Thomas, and the Gospel of Philip. They are all in that particular volume. Now I'm sure that this has been of immense interest to you, and that you are just shaking in your seats from excitement. And with that we'll go on to the treatise, the Gospel of Philip itself. Now this is really the most important, if not the next to the most important of the Nashvadic Gospels. I call it that, and the question may be asked right away, why? Well, surely the Gospel of Thomas, which is the most popular in terms of teaching, it is the most informative, but there is one problem. When the Gospel of Thomas is contrasted with the Gospel of Philip. Now the Gospel of Thomas, and we have dealt with some of the sayings, it's quite a few of them there, contains purely teaching. And of course people like that. Maybe we all went to inadequate schools, especially at the present time, and then we want to be taught. But what this means is that the appeal, as interesting, may at times fascinating and unusual it might be, the content speaks to the intellect, speaks to the thinking function, let us say. And while that is of course what people go for, the reason being that most people are not terribly good at thinking, and so they like to perfect their thinking function, and various other situations of that sort. In any event, we are used to being taught. We are used to a didactic process in spiritual matters. The same thing is for a guru. What is a guru? Teacher. Now, there are times when we need to be taught. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if the teaching is good, which is not always the case. But on the whole, let's say, that is the sort of thing that appeals to people because of the intellectual tone of those who are interested in these things. They feel that if they get enough information, wherever they get it from the computer screen or from an Al-Hammadi codex, it's information. I am informed. And of course, implicit in that is the notion, I am informed, but you are not. See, so therefore I am something special. And people want to be something special, even if they are not anything very special. They still want to be something special. And so gnosis is not belief, but rather it is the acquisition of a deep spiritual knowingness, and usually in connection with a mystery. Now I need to brush up our interest and our knowledge a little bit about mystery. Of course, the word mystery comes from Greece, and it was the name for the institutions, because there were several, of course, of ancient Greece, wherein you might say, as the result of the activities that people underwent there, initiations as they are often called, and we got to remember that initiation means what? It means the beginning. If I say I initiate a project, that means I'm going to start something. But people now and earlier, go around intimating, I am an initiate. Oh yeah, that means you started something, buddy. That's what it means. So let's see, you started something, let's see how you continue. Usually there is not much continuing going on. In any event, the Gospel of Philip, almost exclusively, when you read it carefully, is not concerned with belief, but is concerned with mystery experience. This is, let's say, the book that proves that the Gnostic Christianity or the Christian Gnosis had its own mysteries, and that they were certainly not inferior to the pagan mysteries, let's say, of Eleusis, of the Orphic mysteries, of the Dionysian mysteries, or any of those. So that needs to be kept in mind. It may also be of some interest, because these things, while they look coincidental, they are really much more than coincidence. For instance, this little item. In the Greek Orthodox Church, and with translation of the liturgical language in the other Eastern Orthodox churches, what the Western Church calls sacraments, and there are 7 of those, that what the Western Church calls sacraments, to this day are called the mysteries. The baptism is a mystery. The chrismation is a mystery. Marriage is a mystery. So all the sacraments are known in the Eastern Church as mysteries. And I think that, as Shakespeare might say, thereby hangs a tale. And the tale is that they had access to the kind of Gnostic mystery tradition that is contained, among others, in the Gospel of Philip. Now, it is no exaggeration, in my view, to say that the Gospel of Philip is primarily a manual of what could be called Gnostic sacramental theology. In other words, on account of the Gnostic mysteries. The fountain of these mysteries, according to this Gospel, is Jesus himself. And this is probably the most important short summation of the entire Gospel of Philip. It's the 68th saying. It's divided into logia sayings, just like Thomas. The Lord worked all things as a mystery, a baptism and an anointing, and a Eucharist and a redeeming, and a bride chamber. So here we find a listing in Gnostic terminology of 5 of the 7 traditional Christian sacraments, but according to some scholars, especially the noted German scholar Dr. H.M. Schenke, whom it was my privilege to meet once at the Claremont Institute of Antiquity and Christianity. There is also a restored passage in saying 60 of Philip, the mysteries are 7. Now, this needs to be kept in mind, namely that there was in early Christianity, including Gnostic Christianity, which subsequently was declared heretical by the authorities, there was an orientation toward the mystery, which in its intentionality and its possible effects was very similar to the pre-Christian mysteries of the ancient Mediterranean world. I mentioned a few: Eleusinian mysteries, Dionysian mysteries, others, and mysteries of Mithra, and a number of these, and the intention and the possible effects of receiving the mysteries was indeed very similar to that of the so-called pagan mysteries. Why? Because the mystery systems of the ancient Mediterranean world, Egypt, Greece, Rome, others, the mystery system was designed to join up the human personality with its own deepest self. In other words, they were not, as the Victorian phrase, which I dislike because of its inaccuracy, they were not mystery schools. It's a 19th century expression. Sure, at Elefsis they had a little red schoolhouse, come on, because they were not places of learning. They were places of transformation, something that would happen to the individual there. And that transformation, in turn, even though considerable secrecy surrounded the pre-Christian mysteries. For that matter, it would seem the Gnostic mysteries as well. But the issue being that while what actually happened to the people in the mysteries, say in the Eleusinian mysteries, what actually happened to them is a secret, was a secret, will continue to be a secret. And I often felt that to keep such an intricate mystical system in total secrecy for that longer time, especially when it occurred to a bunch of Greeks, is a remarkable accomplishment. Because if there is anything that they like to do, and they love the Greeks, anything that they like to do is talk. And when they are forbidden to talk, boy, they must have a doggone good reason, you know. I remember a Greek friend of mine who, when he would arrive from Greece, his name was Elias Pagulatos, and he usually had something important to say, but it took him a minimum of 1 hour to get around to what he came to talk about. So I just sat there, all right, Elias, and then what, and then what, and then what? You know, then finally he got around to what might be considered the point. But let's say, yet to keep some experiences so secret is certainly a big demand on anybody, and especially on people who are very voluble and very talkative. But so was it, of course. So it is therefore understandable, and that is still preserved in the Greek language, in the Greek Orthodox Church, that the Gnostic Christians would have their own transformational mystical mystery system, and it is that this mystery system, including its ultimate conclusion, that are sometimes veiled, sometimes a little more open in their exposition in the Gospel of Philip. So I still teach a class, a long-distance class on Gnosticism. In fact, I just corrected some of the students' papers now because the end of the semester, and I have always indicated that the Gospel of Philip is a manual of the Gnostic mysteries. If you want to use a more modern religious term for it, it is a book of sacramental theology. So one needs to keep in mind, and I'll be fairly forceful about that for a religious or spiritual tradition to be effective, to be doing its job, as it were, there must be a mystery system within it which leads in various ways, in various steps, which leads the individual soul step by step to deeper and deeper accomplishments in the spiritual realm. And I'll show you the particular emphasis of the Gospel of Philip for a variety of reasons, which I will also share with you. And so any actual religious practice must have something which explains the peculiar fact that there are fewer complexes, fewer resistances in the people who go through the mysteries than in other people. And in that respect, they use the word complex because of a little incident that occurred to Carl Jung. Carl Jung received a commendation, a congratulation from none other than Pope Pius XII. And Pope Pius XII wrote to Jung, and to, I think it may have gone to the Jung Institute, saying that Jung and his psychology were the only means, or at least the principal means, which seems to have taken away the deleterious psychological complexes of people. In other words, that that Jung himself, as he indicated, and the psychologists whom he trained, had much fewer neurotic patients than psychologists of a Protestant or non-religious disposition. And that this indicated something important, so the Pope felt. In other words, he said in so many words, Dr. Jung, you apparently are doing a doggone good job, because those people who go to you, and very few Catholics go to you, and those who went all seem to have fared very, very well in their spiritual life. And for this he was commended. Now, of course, the sacrament or the sacramental practice of confession worked into the matter, which of course the Orthodox churches also have. What these are, the individual relieves himself of burdensome issues and problems which are in his psyche in a confidential conversation with a priest, and then receives absolution which spiritually is said to clear up his psyche from the burden of the burdens that have been weighing down on him. It is known as absolution. And it's a very impressive formula, you know. De in de ego te absolvo in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti ab omnis peccatis negligentiis et indulgentiis tui in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Well, I still know my Latin a little bit. In other words, therefore, when the confession is over, therefore I absolve thee of all their sins, of all their negligence. In other words, everything that you feel guilty about is now okay, so be a good boy and girl and go home. Now, of course, as time goes on, there are some changes and things that are introduced to that, but that is the formula which Jung felt was the equivalent at a certain level of psychotherapy. And I had the good fortune of listening to a noted psychiatrist from the West Side, Dr. Stephan on the radio for an hour today, and he pretty much said the same thing. He said, people who have a spiritual connection and who are able to ameliorate or get rid of their complexes in a spiritual way are so much better off than the secular people who don't. Those are pretty much his actual words. Which in this time and on public radio to state, I would say, is a courageous act. But let's say at that time it became, let's say, evident that the sacramental system, which was inherited by the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox churches, has mysterious and powerful mystical roots, which occurs with great clarity in some Gnostic scriptures. And that, I think, is quite important. Now, as I mentioned before, the Lord did or worked all things as a mystery, or the other translation is in a mystery, whereby is meant an initiatory mystical process, similar to in kind to the ancient mysteries of the pagans. And this, I think, is quite important. So the speaking of these matters, all things as a mystery, and of course it must also be kept in mind that this tradition also is utilized by the various Eastern Orthodox churches. But here is a statement, the fourth, quite early, the fourth logion or saying in Philip. God is a dyer, as the good dyes, which are called true, dissolve with the things dyed within them, so it is with those whom God has dyed. Make a deep imprint, a transformative effect. Inasmuch as his dyes, this means God, are immortal, they are immortal by means of his colors. But God immerses what he immerses in water, indicating that the first of these initiatory mysteries is the baptism with water. So what we see here then is that obviously what the Gospel of Philip is alluding to is a sequence of initiatory acts. And no doubt there are various ways in which this can be explained for us. I think one of them is that when a person has a Gnostic soul, when a person is ready for that sort of thing, then the sacrament, as we call it now, will have a more profound, a more transformative effect than perhaps with others, maybe including infants. The issue of infant baptism versus adult baptism has been argued for century after century. And so another allusion now to the initiatory mysteries here is the following one, the 66th saying of Philip. The soul and the spirit entered existence from water and fire. The child of the Bridal Chamber came into being by these and by light. The fire is the chrism, the light is fire. The light also is formless. We speak not of it, but of the other whose form is white, which is of the light and beautiful and bestows beauty. Now, these were Coptic sentences which were obviously not terribly easy to translate, but the indication is there that the two elements, for thousands of years, humanity, both in the East and in the West, believed that reality, that the universe was composed of the elements. Sometimes in the East, China, some Indian traditions, the elements are 5. In the West, they are 4: earth, water, fire, and air. And that these elements, in turn, are the vehicles of the initiatory mystery. So something happens with the elements, something happens with the water, something happens with the fire, wherein it is combined with a sacramental act and then makes a deep imprint on the psyche of the individual. That is the way that the author, who is said to be Saint Philip the Apostle, incidentally, it was a fairly popular name in biblical, New Testament times, primarily because of the Macedonians, because several kings of Macedonia, including the father of Alexander the Great, were Philippos. And you know what Philippos means? Somebody who likes horses. So if you are a horseman or a horsewoman, or if you're a horse lover, then you are a Philip. And you know who in modern times are really a very interesting person who would deserve a lot of study by us, but I would say hardly anything shorter than a year would not suffice, is the San Francisco seer Philip K. Dick, whom you may have heard from, who uses as his pseudonym when he writes in the first person in his books, uses the term horse lover fat. Philippus and fat Dick. Dick in German, wenn jemand dick ist, then he is corpulent. A very interesting man who had a fabulous visionary life, and who had communicated some of it in a very exciting fashion. But that's really just an addition to all this. So now what is... Okay. What we need then to keep in mind that we have indications in the Gospel of Philip, not just of individual devotional acts. Somebody is baptized, somebody gets married, somebody is chrismated or so forth, but we have the indications of a system. And the system is to the effect that as the candidate partakes of these mysteries one after the other, his connection, his or her connection with something very deep, something very powerful, and something very promising that is within himself, but which is now strengthened, which is now enlivened, which is now fed, as it were, grows. So the issue is, as Gerald Hurd was wont to say, we humans are the only unfinished animal. You know, you don't see a rattlesnake to evolve into a dragon, although they may have something in common, or all various other things. Nature is, in spite of the theory of evolution, nature is in terms of its unfoldment of its spiritual content, nature is finished, but we are not finished. We have the capacity within us to undergo a strange sort of development. And this development was and is the objective of a large number of spiritual traditions who treat it in a variety of ways, but who all aim at this kind of development, transformation of the individual. Now I will, instead of reading the quotations to you, although I will still read some more, I'll try to summarize. Some of the essence, the conclusion of Philip, and I won't use the words themselves that are in the Gospel of Philip, but if you study it, you read it, you allow it to enter your consciousness, then you will get the point. So what the Gospel of Philip says that when you strive for the life of the Spirit, you become conscious of a certain division within your own nature, namely a good one and a not so good one. One aspect within your internal nature that desires greater consciousness, that wants to move forward, and another that wants to slow you down, and that sort of whispers to you, why should you bother with that when there are so many other things that you could do? You could make money. You could seduce the neighbor of whatever sex, nowadays especially. You could, all sorts of things like that. You could drink up all the bottles that are standing on your kitchen counter and which you received for your birthday, like I have. You should see them. It's astonishing. And I assure you that they were greatly appreciated and that they will be hopefully consumed in an intelligent and moderate fashion. In any event, there are all kinds of things that you could do. You could take a plane to Tasmania. I don't know what you would want in Tasmania, but when I was in Australia, a lot of people there said that people went there for vacations, particularly businessmen with their female secretaries, so to Tasmania. So it must be a nice place, probably has nice hotels and all that sort of thing. But let us say there is always a diversion, a temptation, something that pulls us into a direction which is away from the transformational path. It's always there. If anybody tells you that the individuational, transformational, alchemical, that would be the last one, process is something easy, then they don't know what they are talking about. Because there is an interaction, a tug of war between various forces which must be overcome. And the indications are clear in the Gospel of Philip, that really what we are faced with there is a process, a transformational process that is very much akin to alchemy. And this would be understandable because the Hermetic school, for instance, who are very closely related to the Gnostics, they are really the ones who spawned the quasi-science of alchemy. But at the, let's say, the objective of alchemy, what it was moving toward, what it wanted to accomplish, was certainly not a monopoly of the Hermeticists, but it was present among Gnostics, among Neoplatonists, among Hermeticists, and in their own ways in the various other traditions. And the issue of that being that when a certain process, a certain development, a phase of existence has to open up within the individual. And the assumption of Gospel of Philip is that when somebody becomes a Gnostic Christian, then they have made the request in their own soul to undergo that kind of a process. And so then things begin to happen. And as like the Gospel of Thomas says, when you enter the kingdom, you are first disturbed. We talked about that. I'm using a different word. What is that disturbance? Those of you who have some knowledge of alchemical symbolism will discover in it the black phase, the nigredo of alchemy. Because what it means is you're not supposed to stay the way you are. You are supposed to transform. You are supposed to change. Now, obviously your present nature is not very prone to transformation, otherwise you would be transformed already. You would already be something entirely different. But you're still the same. And if you have some insight into your own nature, you look back, you are still pretty much the same that you were when you were 20 years old, when you were 18 years old, you know what, and you haven't really changed in a desirable direction all that much. That's why so many people behave like unpleasant adolescents, because they never changed. They never transformed. They are still adolescents in the various internal structures of their psyche. But, so something has to happen. And what happens is that there is, first of all, a process wherein the constituent parts of the human, earth, water, fire, and air, or maybe if you want to psychologize it a bit, the functions of consciousness, of sensation, feeling, thinking, and intuition now are energized, and they acquire each one a certain autonomy. That is, I don't have to go into details, but we all have to some extent experienced that. And it is just and right that we should do so. But this in turn creates a certain confusion. And that is why a lot of people who are, so to say, on the spiritual path, and who are psychic in turn, the people who remember their past lives and all that sort of good stuff, are often also experiencing a good deal of confusion. I wouldn't want to know any of my past lives. They would confuse the living daylights out of me. I mean, I get plenty confused with my present life, especially over the last couple of years. You know, I don't need any more confusion. But let us say an autonomy of what Jung called complexes arises. And these complexes are struggling with each other, fighting with each other, putting each other down, embracing and then punching each other again, you know, and so a strange situation arises, which the old alchemists referred to as the massa confusa. It's right there in Philip, if you read it, but I'm trying to summarize it for you. Now, when that goes on, and there is some proper inspiration, if there is some proper spiritual guidance and presence there, the Hierophant, the chief of the mysteries, is there, and he guides the individual at least up to a certain point, then this confusion subsides. And then it eventually boils down to a duality. And the seven mysteries, which we refer to as the seven sacraments, then are all stages of the transformation, wherein this duality interacts. The two are sometimes opponents, sometimes they seek each other, sometimes this, sometimes that. But there is an ever more intensifying interaction between the polarities, whichever may be prominent at that time within you, between the physical and the emotional, or between the emotional and the intellectual particularly. Our head and our heart seldom march to the same drummer. And that's a task, because after all, we want to know how to think, but we also want to know how to feel, how to love, how to have affection, how to experience the deeper and the higher feelings. And how are we going to accomplish all of this? Well, we have to have an interior guidance, an interior gnosis that will allow us to so maneuver in the midst of these dualities that they begin to interact with each other in a meaningful fashion. And the result of that interaction is that there is a greater energy for the process of transformation in the psyche. Because in the old silly popular saying has it, it takes two to tango. And therefore, when your consciousness is only focused in the physical, well, then all you're going to get is physical experiences and physical things, which a certain amount of which we certainly need, because, well, let's see, eating and drinking is a physical experience. If you don't have that, you're going to starve to death and you're going to die of thirst, and so on and so forth. But once again, it is a portion, it is an instrument, it is one of the four constituent elements, on one of the four elements of the ancients. And we have to be careful with that. And this is where people who aspire to spiritual things, who aspire to spiritual experiences, probably had some already and would like to have more, maybe with greater intensity, maybe with greater meaning, and so forth, run into difficulties because the transformation has to happen. Jung had a saying, he said, I don't make myself, I happen to myself. Now, you might see, well, that, that's not taking charge, that's letting something else. Well, yes, letting something else, and what is that something else? It may be your spirit, your spiritual soul, it may be your true selfhood that is beginning to take hold and beginning to run your life. And if that happens, that is a major, major, major blessing. So what I'm trying to indicate is, if you read through it carefully, it's now contained in a whole bunch of different collections of Nag Hammadi writings or so. If you study the Gospel of Philip carefully, then you will find that what it is an indication and an enticement, a way of inducing in you a process of transformation, which moves step by step. And that is why the Lord taught everything in a mystery, and it goes through the 7 or the 10, as sometimes also there, sacramental or transformational mysteries. Because if you are really there, and if you take advantage of it, and if you have people around you to help you with that, then you can really change, you can really be transformed. And now is the great question. And I would indicate the great question is, what is all this leading up to? What is it leading up to? And the Gospel of Philip has a name for it. Strange one. Because you might think, and because really of the original transformational steps which Jesus himself institutes, Jesus goes and produces good wine at the wedding of Cana. That is his one great approval of marriage. Okay, get married, you guys, and drink some good wine. That's it. And that's the wedding of Cana. But there is not too much said in the New Testament or in the Gnostic Gospels about Jesus being particularly involved with the sacrament of marriage. Why is that? Because he and others of his kind are aiming at a stupendous mystery, which is also called a marriage, and it's called the Bridal Chamber, and which is the ultimate union of the dualities in the human psyche and the consequent arising of an indivisible, unbreakable selfhood, an individuated human. So what all of this works up toward, what the 7 sacraments, including the the central sacrament already in the Gospel of Philip and in others, which is the Eucharist, the bread and the wine. And interestingly enough, the Gospel of Philip itself says in these very words, he said, the Eucharist is Jesus. Now this is something that a good traditionalist Catholic priest could say, or an Orthodox priest. It is. It's not a symbol, although symbols are very important. It's not something that points to something else. It's not something that stands for something else, which would be a sign, but it is a mystery. Just like, where have we come across something like that? Well, to the little bit of information that we have encountered it in the Eleusinian mysteries. Because there is a cup called the kekeon in Greek. And when the candidates drink from that cup, then the great miracle occurs. And they turn into the human replica of Persephone, the maiden. They become the maiden soul who now has visited the dark realm underneath and who is now being raised out of Hades by who? By her mother. Mother, Sophia, Maria, and so forth. So you have a masculine feminine duality there, because the Lord of the underworld who captures Persephone is definitely very male, but he has his role as I'm sorry to say to our woke friends, I don't even know where that word comes from, and I'm a student of words, but of woke, I don't know. In any event, the issue being that the masculine and the feminine principles together, while interacting with each other, the Lord of the underworld and Mother Demeter up on among the flowers in the field where her daughter was first captured and so forth. These two together, while sometimes antagonistic to each other, sometimes friendly with each other, but they bring forth the redeemed, the illumined daughter, the Choré, which means the young girl, namely Persephone. So it takes two to tango, and we have to be, and the union of the two is an archetypal vision which is accomplished among the archetypes. It is what we are moving toward toward the bridal chamber, is the loving reconciliation of the opposites and their ultimate union, and thereby the production of a new being. You can see the symbolism in marriage, conception, and all of these things. So there is nature and there is supernature. Nature has sex. Supernature has the bridal chamber. And so the individual, by going through the various helping agencies, which are the 7 or sometimes more than that, seven sacraments, the mysteries. By going through these, becomes stimulated, becomes energized, and is led ultimately to the bridal chamber. Now, where did we hear of that bride chamber or bridal chamber last? In the Acts of Thomas, by which I introduced the Gospel of Thomas, where Thomas is taken by the girl whom he meets on the street of the city where his ship stops, and she says, "Oh, mister, you speak Aramaic, you must be Jewish." And he says, "Of course, girlie, I am Jewish, what else can I be?" Something of that sort. Anyway, little Fairfax Avenue interaction there. But let's see, and then she tells him, "Look, there's something interesting going on here. If you come with me tonight, I tell you where to go, and there is a big wedding, a gigantic big banquet and everything. It is going to be very interesting." Of course, she is a messenger of Sophia, of Chokmah, and she can tell that this is a holy man, that this is an initiate who is being sent by his spiritual master, by Jesus, who appeared to him and said, "Look, Thomas, you got to go to India." So that, there's something important going on here. She invites him because she knows that he is worthy of such an invitation. And then, as he comes to the banquet, as he mingles with the guests, so eventually he's taken up, so to say, into another dimension where the great bridal chamber takes place. And this is considered a great and holy mystery, because what is it? It's the alchemy that is taking place. It's the salt and the sulfur. It's the gold and the silver. It's the masculine and the feminine principles, but in their elevated and totally refined form, coming together. Why? In order to create a new being. The new being that is the stone of the philosophers, the elixir of life, the ultimate coming together of the diverse elements and the diverse opposites. Now you may ask, and that it's a very legitimate question. I have asked it, people have asked me, so I suppose it's worth mentioning that why is this necessary? Why can't we just grow like a weed? A lot of people do, and you can experience the result of that. They are not much more than human weeds, But why can't we just grow like a weed or like a tree or for that matter, like a kitty cat or a puppy dog? Why do we have to go through all of these things, initiations and alchemy and gnosis and so forth? Because we are different. We are special. No, I don't mean that this is, an exalting of the human species, but the human species is different. When have you seen really a tomcat paint a picture like Rembrandt? No, it's not going to happen. Cats have their own things to do, and other animals have their own things to do. But we have our things to do. And if we don't do it, then what has happened? We have failed. And the Gospel of Philip points that out very clearly. Therefore, it says, come on, we have something for you. We have a system for you that consists of 7 or 10 initiatory acts, beginning with the water of baptism, but all of these, you have to be able to participate in them as consciously as you can, as spiritually as you can. In my increasingly long career of ecclesiastical things and so forth, I have been asked a number of times, but I have taken communion, and I don't feel anything. Well, you know what? You don't have to feel anything. Something may be happening to you that is above feeling, that is more important. And the more consciously, the more devoutly, the more meditatively you do it, then the more it will do for you and in you. Because these things have been designed in order to help you on the what the French occult tradition calls l'escalier des sages, the stairway of the sages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and maybe more. It is not something that boom just happens out of somewhere, but it is something that happens as the result of the transformational stages that the individual undergoes. Now, I need to throw in something else, which is, again, it's the sort of thing wherein, it may sound like I'm sort of titillating people about what could happen or should happen to them without offering anything to them. But, when you read the Gospel of Philip, you go through, the Lord did everything in a mystery, our baptism and the chrism and the Eucharist, and then it says, and the redemption and the Bridal Chamber. So that there are yet the higher steps, many of which, so I have been informed at one time, that when the initiate, as it were, is in the right place, people can undergo in their own souls without even an external administering sacramental agency, although sometimes they are there. So we have been informed, and this is very, very much according to the practice of Valentinus, that when the 7 steps, or maybe even less than that, are taken, then there come greater and mysterious steps, and at the apex of these is the Bridal Chamber. There is often in the Valentinian system that we have read about, and it's very likely that the Gospel of Philip is one of those. There is an indication that there are 2 mysteries that have been suppressed or forgotten about. And these 2 are the final one, the Bridal Chamber, and the other one for which different translations have been made, and it is often called the consolamentum, like in the Cathars. So there is a time of the turning when the soul must say no to the fatal attraction of physical manifestation. There comes a time. Again, it's not something that I can teach you or somebody can teach me, then we're going to repeat it and then it is going to happen. But a time comes when the soul joined to the spirit says, now I'm ready to take a step into the other. Now I'm going to lift my crotchety feet from this muck and dirt in which I have been walking, and I'm walking in a different path. Now I say no to where I have been and what has happened. And this, of course, is contrary, and justly contrary, because it's superior to what has been made largely under syncretistic influences, like much of Indian philosophy and so forth, out of the process of reincarnation. If you keep on reincarnating, and if you want to reincarnate, you know what? You're going to get precisely nowhere. Because you stay in the same place. Is that so difficult to understand? No. If you stay in the same place and you are sort of treading water, then you haven't gone anywhere. It's like, I think in the Gospel of Thomas, one of the sayings is that an ass, a donkey, has been in one of these treadmills, was in a treadmill, and he walked 100 steps, and he was still in the same place. You can have 100 lives and still be in the same place. Why? Because that's not how it works. That's the way things work on earth. If I have 100 of something, that's more than if I had one, especially dollars. But the issue is that something has to change in kind. And what, but you want to serve humanity, and so you have to come back to be human. And you know what? Look at all the appearances and the deeds, the helpful and miraculous deeds of angels. They were not humans. Angels were never humans, ever. According to most of the teachings that deal with angels, which really angelology comes originally from Persia. It was Zarathustra and the Persian religion who taught the angels. In any event, angels and others. And for that matter, let's say the great teachers like Jesus Christ and others, they are other, they are different. They have come from outside. And because they have come from by outside, I don't mean a flying saucer or something like that. The only times I saw saucer flying was when we had a big earthquake. The saucers were flying out of my cupboard, Oh, there were a lot of flying saucers and a lot of flying pieces afterwards, I assure you. But that's really not totally germane to our subject. But what you have to realize that what you are moving toward, what you ought to achieve, the bride chamber that you should experience is really, really different. It is not what you experience ordinarily or even extraordinarily. It is different in kind. You can be a very good person, and these are the ones whom the Mahayana Buddhists and Tibetans and those call bodhisattvas. As a human you become a bodhisattva, a benevolent force in the world. And that's certainly very admirable, and there is a need for things like that. But then there comes a point when Thomas climbs up that that stairway up to the upper portion, and there he sees the bridesmaids and the angels and the holy bedchamber of the feminine and the masculine, of the two opposites, the great alchemical work. Then away from here, you're away from here. And of course that is the difference, let's say, between the gnosis and various, let's say, naive notions that if you stick around here long enough lives, then you are going to be a great salvific contributor to the welfare of humanity. Who says? Who says? You might be born as a rascal. You might be born as a criminal. That'll be your karma, sure. And the karma of other people whom you maltreat, probably. The issue is that a real, complete change from immanence to transcendence, from material and psychic to transcendental, something really transcending these things. It is a change in kind, not just a change in degree. Oh, I've been stupid and now I am wise. All right, so hallelujah. But the issue is that there is a substantial, essential change. It is so momentous, so tremendous, so astonishing that we can't even imagine it. We can have just a little kind of prevision of it. And that is the philosopher's stone. That is the ultimate conclusion of the cycles of birth and rebirth, and the life is no longer a life on earth, but life is in transcendence. And the issue is, as the Gospel of Philip very beautifully points out, I don't think I would have done a better job if I have read more of the Logia, because this is what they are saying, of course, that we must change. Therefore, says one of the great alchemists, therefore be ye living philosopher's stones. I could make a pun there about stone, but I won't. But the issue is we must change into something that is essentially different. Now you may say, how can I change into something different when I am the way I am now? I could. That is where the 19th century Darwinian notion of evolution should never have been mixed up with spiritual things. We are not evolving, we are transforming. Now then, however, we need to keep in mind that how can we do it? How can we move in that direction if it's so different from everything that we had before? Because there is something inside of us. There is something there now that is of the eternal, that is of the transcendental, because it transcends everything. That's what, incidentally, I mentioned. I shouldn't really brag about things like that, about who I heard on the radio. Come on, is that something to brag about? But Dr. Stephan Marmer was asked by his interviewer whether he was religious, or whether he felt that religious elements were really important in psychotherapy, and he said, absolutely. He said, if there is no transcendence in a patient, then he says, I have very great doubts that I can do anything with that patient. Just like that. In other words, there is something here that is already transcendent. It has already transcendent things. There is something inside of us that has overcome the world already. We may not feel it, but it's there. And the closer we can come to it, the more interaction and intercommunion we can have with it, the more we will move toward the Bride Chamber. And so this is the great message, really, which does not appear as frequently and as vociferously in really any of the other Nachamadi scriptures that I know of, as in Philip, that there is a step-by-step transformation, and that some of the alchemical ingredients and helpful agents that lead toward the conclusion of that transformation are already here, and that we can undergo a process of spiritual inspiration and transformation if we avail ourselves of the mysteries. Now, once again, I am not beating the drum here for sacramental spirituality, although I have practiced it in a priestly capacity throughout the majority of my life, and it has been the greatest help to me. But something of that sort has to happen. You have to encounter the mystery. You have to make the steps of the mystery in your own soul by whatever aid, by whatever stimulation and inspiration there might be. If you do, then everything is all right. If you don't, then in a sense nothing is all right, because you are captured in a matrix that is alien to you in reality, that is alien to your deeper nature, that is contrary to it, and that will hold you back. You will have gigantic weights tied to your feet so that you cannot rise to the mystery of the Bride Chamber. But there is such a thing. You can really be transformed. You can really work in that direction. You have to accept its reality. Don't exchange it for anything else. And when you accept its reality, and when the soul makes these steps, then you transcend. And that's why we have a transcendental function. And when you transcend, then you enter the mystery. And that's why the Lord taught everything in a mystery. And then he repeats some of them. You have to undergo the mystery within yourself. And with such stimuli and such helpful agencies as you may avail yourself. And when that happens, then let us say the purpose of human existence has been completed. That is the completion. That is the finish. It's not anything else. And it's really the inner self and the outer self. People call it various things. In the magical tradition, it's called the HGA, the Holy Guardian Angel, which is the higher self, the transcendental self within you, has wed, has united in an abiding union, has wed your lesser self. And you can call it what you call. It has been called illumination, it has been called enlightenment, it has been called any number of names but it is the fulfillment of a human life. When you make the outer and the inner and the above and the below, and the male and the female, and they didn't mean what's going on now in society, into a single one, then you will have entered the kingdom. When you have made the two elements, when you made the salt and the sulfur, the sun and the moon, one, then all of a sudden everything is different. And you say, well, what am I talking about, I am talking about an experience which in a subdued, in a minimalist and often suppressed and repressed fashion, I think most of us have experienced already. We have experiences of that sort. They come to us, but we have to recognize them and revere them and try to do what we can so that they may be repeated. I'm not talking as Reverend Ike, that redoubtable clergyman, used to talk about the pie in the sky by and by as you die. I'm not so good with the southern accent. I'm not talking about a chimeric situation there, but something that has happened, something that is happening, and it's not, we are strangers in this strange land, but at the same time, we are also at home in heaven. We are at home in the great cauldron of transformation, in the great mixing bowl of the eternal, where out of which we shall arise and have become a living philosopher's stone, animated like the bloodstream by the elixir of life. And this, of course, is really the great gift of the Gnosis. And that is why the Gospel of Philip is so extremely important, because it indicates to us that something great, something mysterious, something extraordinary is happening. And not just will happen, but is happening. And the more conscious you are of it, the more effectively and the sooner it will happen. This is what, at least in my not so humble opinion, this is what C.G. Jung was striving for. He said, to facilitate and to bring about the individuation, the coming together of the opposites, the alchemy of the soul, because that alchemy is trying to happen. You are in the kitchen, not with Dinah. Maybe Dinah is an alchemist. Why not ever? But you are in the alchemist's kitchen. You are engaged in the task, and you are the elements, and you are the cauldron, and you are the fire underneath it, because this is what is really happening, and everything else. Now I'm going to be real grandiloquent and tough. Everything else is a distraction. Everything else is what is destined to draw you away from the great task. A distraction and a deception. The world is full of them. Whether they are physical, whether they are emotional, whether they are intellectual, they are all distractions. The world is full of them. So don't be distracted. Don't be drawn aside from the road. Don't deny the great and glorious necessity of being transformed and of availing yourself of such assistance to that transformation that you can and that really works, because then you cannot go wrong. These things have been arranged for our benefit by an ultimate beneficent power, beneficent and wise and good. How can we fail? But we must be there. We must have eyes to see and ears to hear and grab hold of these opportunities. And then we will enter the Bridal Chamber, and for the first time in aeons and aeons, we will have become one. We will have become the individuum, the indivisible oneness. And that is the objective. That is what we are moving toward, and with the help of the celestials, that is what indeed we shall accomplish. Read Philip and keep these issues in mind, and I think it will stimulate you and open you up to possibilities that are very, very promising, that are very, very good, and which are ultimately going to do us a tremendous amount of good. So for this evening, I thank you very much, and we'll take a look at the Evangelium Veritatis, the Gospel of Truth, which was probably written down by the great Valentinus himself on the next occasion. So thank you very much for having been here.